for your shoes.
Oh, of course.
Wine bag for you, Jesse.
Wait, I want that too.
A newspaper for you.
Take a picture.
I love it.
This is
Thank
very
you.
nice.
Producers.
Oh my God.
Very nice.
You did a
Look
really
at
nice
it.
job. Thank
There
you.
you go.
Thank you,
Oh, it's got a
Sandra.
little zipper.
Juan.
Okay, this is all over the internet. Take a look at this picture, folks. It's a picture of a farmer in rural Spain. Now take a look at that face a little bit closer. Now compare that face to this face. Yes, you know him. It's President Trump. Yes, they're doppelgangers. Who knew?
What?
Dolores Antello, 64-year-old farmer, never met the president, doesn't even own a cell phone, but social media has made her an international star because she looks like the president.
Doesn't look like
Now the woman is being called the Donald Trump of Costa de Morte, and it's a viral sensation. Her daughter Anna said, "Imagine if we were in Donald Trump's family." Oh my goodness.
Well, you could do a little 23andMe.
Yeah.
just
Never know.
That dude did that with Obama.
All right,
taking
set your
another
DVRs.
shot.
Never miss an episode of The Five. Special report up next with special guest James Comey. Hey, Bret.
Hey, Dana, thanks. This is a Fox News alert. Welcome to Washington. I'm Bret Baier. President Trump blasted former FBI Director James Comey today, calling him a liar, a leaker, and a man guilty of crimes. At this hour, we are still waiting his arrival to Fox here at the Washington Bureau. We're told he's in traffic. Hopefully, he's just minutes away. I'll get Mr. Comey's response to the president's fiery remarks in just a few minutes. But first, the other news of the day. President Trump is standing by his men, despite Dr. Ronny Jackson withdrawing his name from consideration as the next VA secretary following a Democratic-led firestorm of misconduct allegations, and EPA Chief Scott Pruitt getting hammered over spending by lawmakers on Capitol Hill. And for the first time today, the president himself appearing to admit to Fox News that Michael Cohen helped him with the Stormy Daniels situation. All of that on this day. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts following all the developments as he does from the North Lawn of the White House. Good evening, John.
Brett, good evening to you. Let's start first of all with Dr. Ronny Jackson to hear the White House tell it Democrats were out to destroy the career of a good man. The Democrats say the president should have known better than to send them a nominee that would never be confirmed. The upshot of all this, Dr. Ronny Jackson has withdrawn his name from consideration, and the president is now looking for a new nominee to be VA secretary.
Let's go. We'll go to the Oval Office.
Signing autographs for children on Take Your Kids to Work Day, President Trump today unloaded on critics who forced Veterans Affairs nominee Dr. Ronny Jackson to withdraw.
He's a great man, and he got treated very, very unfairly. He got treated really unfairly.
In a statement, Dr. Jackson denied the laundry list of allegations Democrats had amassed against him, saying, "I expected tough questions about how to best care for our veterans, but I did not expect to have to dignify baseless and anonymous attacks on my character and integrity." The Senate Minority Leader said if anyone is to blame for the maelstrom around Dr. Jackson, it's President Trump.
The president is what caused this problem by not properly vetting, by making these decisions on the fly, by making sure they don't count.
As the Jackson withdrawal was still settling, the president's embattled EPA administrator was in the hot seat in Congress, bombarded with questions about political favors and excessive spending on travel, security, and a secure phone booth.
You are unfit to hold public office and undeserving of the public trust.
Pruitt insisted the charges against him are way overblown.
Half-truths, or at best, stories that have been so twisted they do not resemble reality.
Perhaps one of the most controversial issues facing Pruitt, huge raises that were given to 2 EPA staffers against the direction of the White House. In a Fox News interview, Pruitt denied any knowledge of the raises or who approved them.
So who did it? It may be there would be some accountability.
A career person or a political person?
I don't know. I don't know.
You don't know? You run the agency. You don't know who did it?
But Pruitt admitted today he gave his chief of staff the authority to grant pay increases and knew the 2 staffers wanted raises. However, Pruitt says he didn't know the details.
One of the aides who received a substantial raise stated that you were aware of and supported the raises. Was that true?
I think with respect to the raises, what's important,
yet was that true?
Was not aware of the amount, nor was I aware that of the bypassing or the PPO process not being respected.
In a morning phone interview with Fox and Friends, President Trump today put the Department of Justice on notice. Start investigating charges leveled at his opponents, he said, or he might just step in.
I have decided that I won't be involved. I may change my mind at some point because what's going on is a disgrace.
It's an absolute disgrace.
And after denying any knowledge of the Stormy Daniels payoff, for the first time today, President Trump appeared to acknowledge Michael Cohen was working on his behalf.
He represents me, like with this crazy Stormy Daniels deal. He represented me, and, from what I see, he did absolutely nothing wrong.
And a new development today in the case of Rob Porter, the former staff secretary here at the White House who was fired back in February. In a letter to Chairman Trey Gowdy, the FBI says that it first sent over derogatory information about Rob Porter on March 3rd of 2017. That derogatory information file was addressed to Don McGahn, the White House counsel's office. But the White House continues to insist it did not learn about the allegations that Porter abused his two ex-wives until February 6th of this year. That's nearly a year later. White House officials tell Fox News that McGahn never saw that file, but no one can explain why. Bret?
John, it was clearly a bumpy ride for Scott Pruitt up on Capitol Hill. Is there a sense behind the scenes there that his future has changed in the eyes of the White House?
I don't know if this changes things to any greater degree than they were already at, Bret. I mean, it's no secret around here at the White House that the only person in this building who supports Scott Pruitt is the president. But then again, he's the only person who needs to.
Right. And last thing on Ronnie Jackson, he goes back to his former job. Is he going to stay there?
You know, that's a question. He's currently working in the White House medical unit, but when he was tabbed for the nomination for VA secretary, he ceased being the president's personal physician. And now they're wrestling with this idea of could he go back to that position with this cloud of allegations hanging over him. But then again, if he says that none of it was true and it wasn't true, why should that prevent him from going back? But at this point, nobody has launched an investigation to try to clear all of this up. So his future right now, Bret, remains very much in limbo.
John Roberts, live on the North Lawn. John, thank you. We are getting updates from James Comey and his people, street by street, really, as they're stuck in traffic, we're told, here in Washington, getting ready to arrive here in the Washington Bureau. Meantime, the U.S. Senate passed a couple of confirmations today, big ones, including one from Mike Pompeo as the new Secretary of State in a vote that was won by a narrow margin. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel is on Capitol Hill with today's confirmation votes. Good evening, Mike.
Bret, good evening to you. A couple of key confirmations for the Trump administration as it relates to foreign policy, including a brand new Secretary of State. Mike Pompeo was sworn in this afternoon at 2 o'clock Eastern time, about 4 hours ago, to be the next Secretary of State, the face and voice of American foreign policy going forward. We're told that Justice Samuel Alito did the honors about 2 o'clock this afternoon, according to State Department spokeswoman Heather Nauert. Earlier today, Senate Foreign Relations Chairman Bob Corker called Mike Pompeo a star.
I think he's one of the most outstanding nominees we could have for this position. I did not know him well when the process began. I knew he had done a very good job as director of the Central Intelligence Agency. But I have to tell you, through the process of him going through the confirmation hearings, the conversations we've had, the meetings we've had, I think he's going to be exemplary.
The vote on the Senate floor this afternoon was 57 to 42. Some Republicans complained that someone with Pompeo's qualifications should have received much stronger support from Democrats, noting that John Kerry and Hillary Clinton received major bipartisan support. A key Senate liberal explained why she would be voting no.
There are many reasons to oppose this nomination, but the main reason for me is pretty straightforward. Mike Pompeo is completely unfit to serve as America's chief diplomat. During his time as a public servant, Mike Pompeo has embraced a variety of views that betray America's values.
Republicans call that pure politics. Also today, Rick Grenell has been confirmed by the United States Senate to be the next U.S. ambassador to Germany. The vote was 56 to 42. There had been complaints that Grenell's nomination had been unnecessarily delayed, but the timing turns out to be perfect, as Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, will be here in Washington at the White House tomorrow. Bret?
Mike Emanuel, live on the Hill. Mike, thank you. We are told the former FBI Director James Comey has arrived here in the building. We have another big headline. We'll take a quick break, and then we will bring him here into studio. The other big headline, America's dad, Bill Cosby, found guilty today in his retrial on sexual assault. Correspondent Brian Yennis is in Pennsylvania tonight with a recap of today's verdict. Good evening, Brian.
Good evening, Bret. Well, Bill Cosby, America's dad, the 80-year-old comic legend, was found guilty by a jury here today. Guilty on all 3 counts of felony aggravated assault. The jury took 14 hours to deliberate this case over the last 2 days. He now faces up to 30 years in prison. Effectively, it could be spending the rest of his life behind bars. He came out of court today defiant, with a fist in the air, almost as though he was acquitted. Not defiantly as he went to his car with his lawyer. Inside, though, an entirely different kind of case. Cosby was sitting there stoically as the verdict was read aloud by the jury. Guilty, guilty, guilty. That was until he lashed out at the prosecutor. The prosecutor asking the judge to revoke Cosby's bail because he was a threat to perhaps leave the United States. Cosby said, well, he lashed out and called the prosecutor an a-hole, saying he didn't have a private plane. And he also yelled out, "I'm sick of him." That's what Cosby yelled out right after that verdict came down. Extraordinary events inside the courtroom today. Cosby's defense lawyer, Tom Mesereau, had this to say after it all went down.
We are very disappointed by the verdict. We don't think Mr. Cosby's guilty of anything, and the fight is not over. Thank you.
Are you going to appeal, sir?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, very strongly.
So Tom Mesereau and Cosby obviously plan on appealing this verdict. Andrea Constant is all about her. She is the accuser and the victim in this case. She alleged that Cosby sexually assaulted her at his home back in 2004. She says that Cosby gave her 3 blue pills and then sexually assaulted her. Cosby said that it was consensual. Ultimately, the jury had to decide who they believed most because there wasn't a lot of physical evidence. A big part of this case was the judge allowing the testimony of 5 other witnesses, women who say that Cosby did the same thing to them back in the 1980s, including the most famous, perhaps, of the accusers, Janice Dickinson, who said Cosby gave her a blue pill and also sexually assaulted her. That was a big part of this case. Cosby is now at home. He's released on $1 million bail on house arrest, and the sentencing date is still to be seen. We'll wait on that.
Brian Yanis, live in Norristown, Pennsylvania. Brian, thank you. Positive day on Wall Street today. The Dow jumped 239. The S&P 500 rose 28. The Nasdaq finished up 115. As we promised, the former FBI director has arrived. We'll take a quick break and then my interview with James Comey on a host of topics. You don't want to miss it. Stay here. Welcome back to Special Report. Joining me live in studio, former FBI Director James Comey. A little tougher to get across town without a motorcade.
Oh, it's tough for everybody today.
Yeah, I understand you have a new book out.
I've heard that, yeah.
Thanks for being here. The book is Higher Loyalty, Truth, Lies, and Leadership. Big sales in its first week. I've read the book. I've seen or read every interview that you've done on this media tour. A lot of people have focused on President Trump and your interactions. I want to get to that, but I want to start chronologically with the Hillary Clinton email probe and the decisions you made there. Is it true that you and your FBI colleagues made the decision to exonerate Secretary Clinton well before she was interviewed?
No.
So why wait till the end, and why write up the memo that you eventually bring forward first?
No, that's a good question. Come May, after we've been doing it for about 10 months, I started to, as part of my regular briefing from the investigators, see that their view was it was unlikely to end in a case that the prosecutors at DOJ would bring.
Before the interview?
Sure, yeah, because they'd spent 10 months digging around, reading all her emails, putting everything together, interviewing everybody who set up her system. They weren't certain of that result, but they said, look, boss, on the current course and speed, it looks like it's not going to get to a place where the prosecutors will bring it. So then in May, I started thinking, okay, if it continues that way, and it may not, but if it continues that way, so how do we end this thing in a credible way?
But what, if anything, could she have said in that interview that would have changed your mind and somehow changed what you eventually decided to do?
Well, two ways. First, by lying in a way that we could prove in the interview, or giving us a hook to continue the investigation to see if we could prove a lie, or admitting something that would surprise us about her intent. Now, a lot of folks have asked, good question, about why to do the interview at the end. That's fairly typical for a subject interview in a white-collar investigation. I think you see Special Counsel Mueller taking exactly that approach with the president.
But you already knew that she had been telling whatever you want to say, lies, myths, truths about this investigation and how she handled those emails. Take a listen.
Secretary Clinton said there was nothing marked classified on her emails either sent or received. Was that true?
That's not true.
Secretary Clinton said I did not email any classified material to anyone on my email. There is no classified material. Was that true?
There was classified material emailed.
Secretary Clinton said all work-related emails were returned to the State Department. Was that true?
No, we found work-related emails, thousands, that were not returned.
So it went on. I mean, there were clearly a pattern there, and you had already made your decision.
No, I had not made my decision, but I could see what the investigators saw after 10 months. If you don't have a general sense of where you're headed after 10 months of that kind of work, you're not competent. They could see it was unlikely, although not certain, unlikely to get us to a place where they would prosecute it at the Justice Department. And the question was, would she lie to us? What people say in the public forum, in a debate, or in a political campaign is not our business. Our business is, are you going to lie to us? And if you are, and we can prove it, then we're going to prosecute you.
You go back to intent a lot, but actually the statute, as it's written, handling classified information, grossly negligent doesn't deal with intent.
Well, grossly negligent is an expression of a kind of intent. How were you acting? What was your mental state at the time?
You were careful to call it extremely careless, not grossly negligent.
Right. I was struggling with the fact that we thought it was not mere sloppiness, but didn't rise to the level of criminal misconduct that the Justice Department would prosecute. So how do you describe that? I probably should have said really sloppy, but I wanted to be honest and say it's above sloppy. It doesn't add up to what the 1917 statute meant when it said grossly negligent is a felony.
So why did you allow Cheryl Mills, Secretary Clinton's chief of staff, to sit in on that interview? She was potentially a subject or a target in the investigation. She was a government employee. She wasn't Clinton's attorney, but yet she sits in there and talks with her throughout the interview.
Yeah, my understanding was at that time she was one of Clinton's attorneys. She was no longer a subject in our investigation. The agents had scrubbed her conduct very carefully by that point, and she was no longer a subject. But that, again, that's a reasonable question. But the facts are, not a subject, one of Clinton's lawyers. She's entitled to be in an interview.
We asked people to tweet in or write in. We have one from J. Harper Wilson. I am a retired FBI agent serving almost 25 years, retiring in 1995 as a senior executive special agent. Please ask Thursday why a grand jury was not used in the Hillary Clinton investigation as would be normally, and why was it run out of HQ? Book did not address.
Yeah, the second one I'll take first. It was run out of HQ because it was a case of intense interest outside to the media, and so to keep it tight, it was worked in the counterintelligence division at headquarters. You can reasonably disagree with that if you're an FBI person. Could have put it in Washington field office, could have put it in New York, but the decision that counterintelligence made was it'll be kept tighter and leak-proof, which it was, in the counterintelligence division.
And no grand jury?
I'm not allowed to comment on the way in which the grand jury was used. I can say this, though. She was not interviewed in front of a grand jury, which is another judgment call that prosecutors and investigators make all the time.
You thought Attorney General Loretta Lynch was compromised, that you had to do something different because of that tarmac meeting with former President Clinton and because she had wanted to call it a matter, correct?
Yeah, and other things.
And other things, and this classified thing that ends up leaking to the New York Times. But she denies this. She writes, if he had any concerns regarding the email investigation, classified or not, he had ample opportunities to raise them with me, both privately and in meetings. He never did. So someone's not telling the truth here. Is it the former Attorney General or you?
No, actually, I think we're both telling the truth. I never went to her and said, Loretta, I think you should recuse yourself. My problem was she had already announced it publicly that she wouldn't and that she would accept my recommendation. And so at that point, what do I do? And I decided at that point, I got to step away from her.
All right, fast forward. A lot of people are upset about how it comes out, how you take control. It actually leads to Rod Rosenstein. He cites this in what you did as a reason for recommending your firing. You go on after that recommendation. You write a letter to Congress to announce the case is reopened because more classified emails have been found on Anthony Weiner's computer. You said it was last night a tough choice between concealing or coming forward, a really tough choice. But there are authorities in New York who are saying that FBI HQ was slow walking that case, and weeks went by without any action. Did you know that Andrew McCabe, your deputy, had sat on that revelation about the emails?
Yeah, I don't know that. I don't know that to be the case. I do know that New York and FBI headquarters became aware that there may be some connection between Weiner's laptop and the Clinton investigation weeks before it was brought to me for decision. And as I write in the book, I don't know whether they could have moved faster and why the delay.
So was it the threat that the New York agents were going to leak, that it existed, really what drove you to the not conceal part?
I don't think so. I think actually what drove it was the prosecutors in New York who were working the criminal case against Weiner called down to headquarters and said, are we getting a search warrant or not for this? That caused, Justice Department headquarters to then call across the street to the FBI and poke the organization, and they started to move much more quickly. I don't know why there was, if there was slow activity, why it was slow for those first couple of weeks.
I want to move on to the Trump investigation. We're told after this Australian diplomat reports his conversation with George Papadopoulos, talking about plans to get Russia info or emails about Hillary Clinton, that the FBI is notified through the State Department about this in early May. True?
No.
When were they notified?
First of all, I'm not confirming what the source was from it. The FBI learned the information about Papadopoulos in late July and opened a counterintelligence investigation at that point. The meeting that you're talking about occurred in the spring,
April,
before there were any public revelation of Russian hacked emails, but the FBI didn't learn about it until late July.
Okay, so what is the crime or the collusion that launches the investigation?
Yeah, collusion's not a word that I'm familiar with. I've seen
what
it
is
in
the
media.
crime? What is the evidence, basically, that launches?
The question is, you open a counterintelligence investigation to understand, are any Americans in cahoots with the foreign intelligence activities of an adversary nation?
When the Steele dossier comes out, sometime early July, when did you personally learn about the memos in the dossier?
Sometime in the fall. I don't remember exactly when.
You're talking fall of...
fall of 16.
Right. So who told you about them?
I don't remember. Someone on my senior staff.
Do you remember how they were described?
I remember they briefed me about it, explained that it came from a reliable source, former Allied intelligence officer. I remember being given a copy of it. I don't know whether it was September, October, sometime in that period of time.
When did you learn that the DNC and Hillary Clinton campaign had funded Christopher Steele's work?
Yeah, I still don't know that for a fact.
What do you mean?
I've only seen it in the media. I never knew exactly which Democrats had funded. I knew it was funded first by Republicans, opposed to Donald.
But that's not true.
I'm sorry?
That's not true. That the dossier that Christopher Steele worked on was funded by Republicans?
My understanding was his work started funded by Oppo Research, funded by Republicans.
So Free Beacon and said that they had Glenn Simpson and Fusion GPS on a kind of a retainer, but they did not fund the Christopher Steele memo or the dossier. That was initiated by Democrats.
Okay, my understanding was the activity was begun, that Steele was hired to look into, was first funded by Republicans, then picked up, the important thing was picked up by Democrats opposed to Donald Trump.
So is that why, did you tell President Obama that the dossier was who it was funded by?
No, not to my recollection.
Did you want to know who it was funded by?
I wanted to know what I knew, which is that it was funded by people politically opposed to Donald Trump.
Okay.
Which particular opponents wasn't that important
when
to me.
did you, so you still to this day don't know that it was funded by the DNC or
I've read
the
that in the
Clinton
media,
campaign?
but I don't know for a fact and didn't know while I was at the FBI which exact opponent of the president's funded that.
Okay. How many times did you, and to what extent did you brief President Obama on the dossier?
I didn't ever brief President Obama on the dossier. I was present during a conversation where Director of National Intelligence briefed it to him, as we did to the Gang of Eight and to the President-elect the first week of January.
You called the dossier unverified, salacious. Why did you use that to the FISA court to ask for surveillance for Carter Page? Not only use it, but you led with it. A bulk of that FISA application deals with that dossier. Why?
Yeah, that's not my recollection, Bret. And I don't know that the FISA application has been released. My recollection was it was part of a broader mosaic of facts that were laid before the FISA judge to obtain a FISA warrant.
There was a lot more than the dossier in the FISA application?
My recollection was there was a significant amount of additional material about Page and why there was probable cause to believe he was an agent of a foreign power. And the dossier was part of that, but was not all of it or a critical part of it, to my recollection.
This intel briefing at Trump Tower, you briefed the president-elect on kind of the sliver of the dossier, really the salacious part about the prostitutes in Moscow and that allegation.
Correct.
Didn't include anything broader than that, right?
Correct. My mission in that private briefing was just to tell him about that slice of it.
And who suggested you brief that?
I think the Director of National Intelligence did, and explained the logic of why it made sense for me to do it, which I agreed with.
So that briefing was just oral. It was just talking to the
Correct, just the two of us talking to each other.
CNN reported at the time that you handed a 2-page executive summary of the dossier over to him.
I did not.
Did not. Speaking of CNN, you write in the memos of that meeting, you write, I said to President-elect Trump, media like CNN had the dossier and were looking for a news hook. I said it was inflammatory stuff. So the story of that briefing leaks out almost immediately after you do it. CNN and others run the story of this unverified dossier. Did you or your subordinates leak that?
No.
Did James Clapper?
No, not to my knowledge. No.
John Brennan?
I don't know who leaked it. I had no part in any leaking of it. It was about 4 or 5 days later that it leaked, but I remember because President-elect called me about it.
Did you ever try to find out?
Who leaked an unclassified public document? No.
Did you inform the President-elect at the time what you knew about how it was funded or who was behind it?
No, I did not.
Did you inform him that Christopher Steele had been fired by the FBI?
No.
Or that he had lied?
No, and I didn't know those things at that time anyway.
Or that it had been used, at least in part, to get this FISA application to spy on somebody in his campaign?
No, didn't come up.
Is it fair to say that President Obama and his...
Carter Page was in his campaign when the FISA order was obtained in October.
Tied to it tangentially?
At one point.
Okay. Is it fair to say that President Obama and his inner circle knew a lot more about the dossier and the scope of the investigation than President-elect Trump and his team?
No, I don't think that's fair at all.
You think that they were equal on as far as the briefing?
As far as I know, they knew the same set of facts, as did the leaders of Congress.
There was no difference between what the FBI told the FISA court and what about the Trump-Russia investigation and what you told the new President of the United States?
What the FBI and the FISA application said in October of 2016, I don't remember clearly enough all that's in the FISA application, but we sure didn't lay that out for anybody, President Obama, President-elect Trump, or the leaders of Congress.
Okay. A lot of questions about the interactions with President Trump, and your memo is memorializing that. After you're fired on Capitol Hill, we learn this. Now, this is 17.
I asked a friend of mine to share the content of the memo with a reporter. Didn't do it myself for a variety of reasons, but I asked him to because I thought that might prompt the appointment of a special counsel. And so I asked a close friend of mine to do it.
Who was that?
A good friend of mine who's a professor at Columbia Law School.
So what specifically did you leak to Mr. Richmond?
I sent Mr. Richmond a copy of a 2-page unclassified memo and asked him to get the substance of it out to the media.
You call him a good friend and a professor, but you didn't reveal that you had hired him as a special government employee for the FBI to work on special projects. Why?
Because it wasn't relevant. He was an FBI special government employee until February of 2017.
Did you have other special advisors like that?
No.
So what exactly was his job?
Two things. His primary focus was on our Going Dark challenge, helping us think through and articulate and fight for access to encrypted communications. And then law enforcement data was a big part of his responsibility.
So did you leak other things through Mr. Richmond?
Yeah. I'm smiling, Brett. I don't consider what I did with Mr. Richmond a leak. I told him about an unclassified conversation with the president.
Okay, but the FBI protocol, you went through this with Anderson last time.
I gave him nothing else ever to share with the media.
FBI protocol says your own employment agreement with the FBI prohibits, quote, the unauthorized disclosure of any information or material from or related to FBI files or any information acquired by virtue of my official employment without prior written permission from the FBI. Did you have written permission?
No, and I didn't consider it part of an FBI file, all the things I talked about with Anderson.
You wrote it as an FBI director. It was a work product.
No, it was not. It was my personal aid to memoir.
You were talking to the president?
Sure. I created 2 copies of it, one to keep in my personal safe at home, and I left another one with the FBI so the Bureau could always have access to it. But I always thought of it as mine, like a diary.
Who else did you give, leak, or whatever you want to call it, the
give
memos
is what
to?
I prefer.
Yeah, the memos to.
I gave the memos to my legal team after I gave them to Dan Richmond, after I asked him to get it out to the media.
And
gave 4 memos to my legal team.
Which included Patrick Fitzgerald?
Patrick Fitzgerald.
He was a legal team at that time?
Correct, sure.
And
David Kelly. And Dan Richmond.
Okay. You said in the memos, I said, I don't do sneaky things, I don't leak, I don't do weasel moves. But, I mean, we can argue what a leak is, but that's a leak, isn't it?
It's not.
Okay. Here's what you told Chuck Grassley about leaking.
Director Comey, have you ever been an anonymous source in news reports about matters relating to the Trump investigation or the Clinton investigation?
Never.
Has any classified information relating to President Trump or his associates been declassified and shared with the media?
Not to my knowledge.
So at what point were you made aware that some of the information was classified by the FBI?
Which information?
In the memos.
Oh, yeah, I don't know. Sometime after I was fired, the FBI apparently made a decision that there were some words in at least 2 of the memos, maybe 1, I think 2, that were diplomatically sensitive. And so my lawyers returned them to the FBI. But that testimony was truthful, and I stand by it. I was hoping you were going to ask me that.
I am. I was.
It's truthful.
I want to play what the president said today about you on this channel.
Look, Comey is a leaker and he's a liar. And not only on this stuff, he's been leaking for years. He's probably been using his friend, the so-called professor, who now turns out to have FBI clearance, which he never said. He even lied about that because he never said that in Congress. He said he gave it to a friend. And he gave it to a friend to leak classified information. It's all classified. It was totally classified. So he did an illegal act. And he said it himself, in order to get a special counsel against me.
Reaction to that?
He's just wrong. Facts really do matter, which is why I'm on the show to answer your questions. That memo was unclassified then. It's still unclassified. It's in my book. The FBI cleared that book before it could be published. That's a false statement.
What about not telling Congress that he was a agent for you, or worked at the FBI, or somehow was some employee that you had 35,000 FBI employees?
But none of that was true. I described him, I hope in a good way, as a good friend to expose there might be a bias in my connection to the guy. He had left his FBI job months earlier, and so there's lots of other connections. I know him because we were prosecutors together. I didn't mention that. I taught with him at Columbia. I didn't mention that. I think I offered the Congress a fair picture of my connection to the guy.
Okay, Director Comey, stand by if you would. More with the former FBI director after a quick break, including the reaction to Andrew McCabe, those infamous text messages. We're learning more about them today, and the future of the FBI. Welcome back with former FBI Director James Comey. Since your firing, have you met with former CIA Director John Brennan?
Yes, once, I think.
And former National Intelligence Director Jim Clapper?
Yep, saw him the night before last, I think.
Together?
No. Actually, I had dinner with the 2 of them together and our spouses.
You talked Trump case, or?
No, we did not.
All right. After your handpicked deputy, Andrew McCabe, was fired, you tweeted this. You said, Special Agent McCabe stood tall over the last 8 months when small people were trying to tear down an institution we all depend on. He served with distinction for 2 decades. I wish Andy well. I also wish continued strength for the rest of the FBI. America needs you. You know, the Inspector General found that McCabe lied 4 times, 3 of them under oath. Kimberly Strassel from the Wall Street Journal tweeted a lot of possible questions for you, but here's one. Please discuss Andrew McCabe and the IG report that finds he lied repeatedly, both to you and about you. Do you still believe he stood tall, as you tweeted in January, or is he one of the small people helping to tear down an institution?
Yeah, I still believe he stood tall. He represented himself and the organization under tremendous stress during that period after I was fired. But I read the IG report as you did. It concluded that Andy had not been candid. This is what accountability looks like in the Justice Department.
Should he be prosecuted?
That's not for me to say.
You said it in the Clinton case.
Well, I was then the director of the FBI.
Which was not your role at that moment.
Private citizens should not be calling for the prosecution of people in a case they're not involved in. But I do believe, as it routinely happens, the IG will likely refer it, or has referred it, to a U.S. Attorney's Office to look at it.
So, did you see the disparity here where people look at how the Clinton case was handled and how the Trump case is handled? Did you tell lawmakers?
I don't see disparity.
Did you tell lawmakers that FBI agents didn't believe former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn was lying intentionally to investigators?
No.
You did not.
And I saw
them.
that in the media. I don't know what. Maybe someone misunderstood something I said. I didn't believe that and didn't say that.
About the controversial text messages, we just received a lot more up on Capitol Hill today. If you knew back then, when you were in charge of the investigation, and you saw those texts between Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, the level of animus they had against President Trump, what would you have done?
I'd have removed both of them from any contact with significant investigations.
So shouldn't their work...
Including those involving anybody connected to President Trump, but beyond that, because it's just such poor judgment.
Their work product then be questioned?
Sure, it's a reasonable question to ask.
So then
they were
Peter
bad-mouthing everybody, including the candidate Trump.
So Peter Strzok interviews Hillary Clinton, deals with the bleach bit and the server and Cheryl Mills, all of that, interviews Michael Flynn, and is integral in this whole case.
But he's one of many other people involved in all the things you just ticked off. It's a reasonable question to ask, and I can tell you this. When I saw the text, I was deeply disappointed in them, but I never saw any bias, any reflection of any kind of animus towards anybody, including me. I'm sure I'm bad-mouthing those texts. I'm just not going to read them all. Never saw it, but that's why we had such a big team of people.
Well, you were in charge.
To bang on each other.
So the buck stops with you.
Of course.
Okay.
Of course, I'm responsible.
Jonathan tweeted in, what was the insurance policy Deputy Director McCabe, Strzok, and Page were discussing in his office?
I have no idea.
Any clue?
The problem I had reading the text, I'm sure you've had the same challenges. If anybody pulled any of your listeners' texts or viewers' texts and there's no context, it's hard to figure out what they're talking about. So
There's a lot of text. There's a lot of context with those guys.
Well, the ones I've looked at, I've had a hard time figuring out.
This morning, the president also said this on Fox and Friends.
You look at the corruption at the top of the FBI, it's a disgrace. And our Justice Department, which I try and stay away from, but at some point I won't.
What do you think he meant there?
I don't know. I hope he didn't mean that he's going to decide by executive fiat to direct the actions of what is supposed to be an impartial law enforcement function. Lady Justice has a blindfold. It should stay on.
Did the Inspector General interview you about your handling of the memos?
Sure, yeah.
Has
already. And I expect a report from them, not on the handling of classified information, because that's frivolous, but on, did I comply with policy? Did I comply with my employment agreement?
You said you didn't leak, but there's a New York Times story in April 2017 that first reported the Lynch email. You didn't write about it here in this book because you said it's classified. The New York Times wrote a lot about it. Did the FBI Public Affairs coordinate that story?
Not to my knowledge, and I'm not going to comment on any stories because I'm not allowed to confirm or deny classified information.
All right, in the infamous Oval Office meeting with President Trump, when you asked you to stay behind one-on-one, you write in the book that you felt awkward. You didn't like it.
Correct.
You had been one-on-one with President Obama in the Oval Office.
Correct.
But this was different.
Yeah, because he booted out the Attorney General of the United States, who was lingering trying to stay.
As opposed to the presidential photographer who President Obama boots out.
Sure.
Okay, so you say you didn't push back when he said he hoped you could see your way clear of letting Flynn go, that he was a good guy, hope you can let it go. You said you didn't push back and that he should have known that he couldn't do that. All right, so let's assume that's true, that he should have known that. Is it possible there was another reason why you didn't push back, and that is that you wanted to keep your job?
It's possible, but it's not the case. At least I don't remember thinking about that at the time.
You told CNN last night that you didn't think you'd be fired, that, you know, had you not been fired, you would still be working as FBI director tonight.
Yeah. In fact, that was my intention, to serve another 6 years.
So despite the fact that now you say that this president is morally unfit, that you say impeachment is too good of a remedy on the book tour.
That's not what I said, in a way, I hope not, because I think the voters need to speak.
Exactly. And on the media tour and the Blitz, you basically are encouraging voters to vote Trump out of office because he doesn't line up with your values.
I'm asking them to vote their values, and what I believe your viewers would agree are America's values.
Okay. But as of tonight, had you not been fired, you'd still be working for this guy that you say is like a crime boss, who is morally unfit, who you just don't agree with on principle and values. You'd still have that job tonight.
Absolutely. My goal would be to protect the FBI and serve the President of the United States.
When you say
I respect that office tremendously.
When you say to Republicans, why do you work with this president, and then sit there and say you would still have this job tonight, isn't there a disconnect there?
No, because elected officials in Congress have a public platform and are responsible for communicating with the voters in a way the FBI director is not. My job would be to protect the independence of the institution. Their job should be to represent the people who elected them.
Mr. Comey, the book, Higher Loyalty, has been very successful. We appreciate your time, traffic, and all, sir.
Thank you for your patience and your good questions.
Thank you. Next up, the All-Star panel. Well, it was pushed back by traffic, but we got it in. Former FBI Director James Comey in an interview here on Special Report. Let's bring in our panel. Catherine Herridge, Fox News Chief Intelligence Correspondent. Molly Hemingway, Senior Editor at The Federalist. Mara Eliason, National Political Correspondent of National Public Radio. And Joe DeGenova, former U.S. Attorney. Catherine, first to you. You've covered this for a long time. What stuck out with you?
Well, the amazing exchange to me is when you had Director Comey confirm that he shared those memos documenting conversations with the president with 3 other people. So the Columbia professor, that's what he testified to, also what he described as his personal attorney, Patrick Fitzgerald, and then this other attorney. What's key here is that he told you, Bret, that those memos were returned to the FBI after they found classified information. He can call it whatever he wants. That is a classified spill of information. Doesn't matter whether they have clearances. They didn't have the ability to secure that information.
Joe.
I was amazed. I thought it was breathtaking duplicity. America's dirty cop continues to amaze me with the destruction of the institution that he used to lead. And what Catherine has just said is stunning. It's not his decision. He's supposed to know what's classified. He has the authority to classify under the law, and yet he maintains that he did not give away classified information. He leaked classified information to the New York Times. That's a crime.
Mara.
I think that the difficulty that Comey is having is that he's now in a completely different role, and he can't be in 2 roles at the same time. The completely impartial lawman who believes in serving the presidency and the institutions, and now a partisan actor. And that's, I think, where there's a lot of conflict.
Molly.
I thought his most interesting answer was when you asked him if he would still be at the FBI if he hadn't been fired. And he said he would be, and it was because he believed his job was to protect the FBI. I think that's a very telling statement that suggests that there's something other than justice that was his high concern. And when you were asking him about why he didn't reveal information to the president about who funded the dossier, he seemed to be shockingly uninformed about who funded the dossier. He did not, in fact, attempted to deny.
I want to play the soundbite because I was prepared to go down a different road, and then he said he didn't know. When did you learn that the DNC and Hillary Clinton campaign had funded Christopher Steele's work?
Yeah, I still don't know that for a fact. I knew it was funded first by Republicans, opposed to Donald.
But that's not true.
I'm sorry?
That's not true. That the dossier that Christopher Steele worked on was funded by Republicans?
Okay, my understanding was the activity was begun that Steele was hired to look into, was first funded by Republicans, then picked up, the important thing was picked up by Democrats opposed to Donald Trump.
Catherine.
Well, one of the basics of journalism and any investigation is understanding the credibility of the source, and the fact that he didn't have his arms around what the source was from the dossier was really kind of confusing to me. And then, just as a final point, when you asked him about that being the basis
for the FISA,
he says that it was just a small piece. And
well, that's not what we're learning.
That's in direct conflict with what Republicans have said, which it was the sort of the top line item or the line.
We're going to continue this conversation after the break, trying to get it all in. Stay with us here on Special Report. Got in a lot of questions, digesting the answers now with the panel. Some final thoughts about that interview. Joe.
Well, he said he didn't know that Hillary Clinton and the Democratic National Committee had funded the dossier. Utter nonsense. And the reason it is because he was talking with Clapper about going to brief President-elect Trump about the dossier itself so that they could basically shake the president down during the term of his presidency.
Mara.
I don't know about that, but I do think that the bottom line is you've got Comey versus Trump. Their descriptions of events are in contradiction in many cases. And there's one guy who's going to decide who's right, and that's Bob Mueller, and he's not talking at all, and that's a good thing.
Molly.
One of the things Comey said was that facts matter, but he seemed really vague on a lot of facts, such as who told him about the dossier, or when he was told about the dossier, or how many times Obama was briefed on the dossier. But he did give some interesting information that Obama had been briefed on the dossier in the fall, then later claimed that Obama and Trump had received the same briefing on the dossier, which seems hard to believe that the only thing that they told Obama in the fall was about this one salacious allegation. So I think we have a lot more to learn here about how much the Obama administration knew and at what level.
Yeah, and James Clapper and John Brennan and how that all fits together.
One of the things that James Comey told beat reporters sort of at the height of the Clinton email investigation is that there were no special rules for special people. But when you listen to so many of the incidents described tonight, it seemed to be special rules all around, especially for people who were in his inner circle. And for himself, he drafted those memos on FBI equipment, FBI time, using the FBI email network, and he felt it was okay for him to give them to that special circle of friends. And those are just not the rules that apply to other employees.
Finally, the president said on his interview with Fox and Friends that he may get involved in the Justice Department. Do you think that that means that Mueller or Rosenstein or whatever happens, that he's not going to get through the investigation?
No, I think Mueller will finish. I think what the president means is that he's been told by Don McGahn that it's not good for a president to communicate directly with the Justice Department. I don't think he believes that anymore.
Mara, last word.
Yeah, I thought he got a lot of pushback from that, from Republicans in Congress saying that's a bad idea if it means you're thinking about getting rid of Mueller or shutting him down.
Molly?
I think that people are understandably frustrated with some of what they've been seeing and some of the game playing that has been going around with these investigations, and they would like to see someone, anyone, kind of come in and be the adult in the room.
Well, panel, thank you very much, squeezing it all in, and thank you for tuning in. Thanks for inviting us into your home tonight. That's it for this special report. Fair, balanced, and still unafraid. The story hosted by Martha McCallum starts right after a quick break.